In Jude Bellingham, we may be witnessing a generational talent. Despite playing primarily in midfield, he has already had a top 20 season in terms of goals in a league season for an English player, and the season is still far from finished. When looking at more pure midfielders, that top 20 season becomes a top 10 season. He epitomizes what the FA hoped for when they revitalized the English youth system more than a decade ago, combining the traditional physicality of English players and the technical flair that lets him fit into modern-day football. What's more fascinating is that just 20 years old, we have already seen his game evolve season on season. But what exactly is this evolution? Let's take a look. Making his debut at just 16 years old, Birmingham played him in a variety of positions, both for his own development as well as to create room for more senior players. In the 4-4-2, he often played in a position we are much more accustomed to seeing him, the central midfield. Even at this age, it was difficult to poke holes in his game, but the one area where he did not stand out was his passing. This meant that at this early stage in his career, he was hardly built to be the tempo-controlling metronome who could then break the game open with long-range passing at will. In fact, he was in the bottom 30 percentile for passes attempted, pass completion, and progressive passes. So when in this position, he instead leaned on his incredible engine, as the pivots operated in a more typically English pairing, a 4-4-2 where both pivots were happy to take up either an attacking or defensive role. Bellingham thrived, picking the ball up deep and looking to carry his side up the pitch. He had an ideal combination of technical ability to take on opposing midfielders and enough of a burst of pace to get away from his opposition, being in the top 30% for midfielders in successful dribbles as well as progressive carries. But despite being Bellingham, at times a central role might have been too much onus on such young shoulders, and almost half of his appearances were out wide, on paper at least. He would start wide and at times hold this width when the game demanded, particularly when he was on the left-hand side. But for the most part, when the fullbacks looked to fly forward, Bellingham was already developing something which would become one of his biggest strengths: his off-the-ball intelligence. With the width taken care of, Bellingham would drift centrally, often in the half space, but with the freedom to find pockets across the pitch to make the difference. And he would do just that, often receiving and looking to lay on teammates ahead of him at times. His awareness of passing opportunities, once again, was something he was still in the midst of developing, and he wasn't playing incisive through balls to make the difference. In fact, his volume of shot-creating actions when playing in his teammates was very middling, but it was his ability to take on a man and then create a shot that stood out, as he was in the top 15% for shots after a dribble for midfielders. His first 2 seasons at Dortmund saw the birth of Bellingham Mark II, and the stats don't lie when looking at them. And if you're wondering where to get the stats in this video, they're from the wonderful StatHead by FBref, which is the most advanced stats website for football I've come across. Regular FBref is great for percentiles and basic stats, but StatHead has taken that to the next level. So with a simple search, you can find stats like the highest scoring seasons by English players or midfielders. Or an even more fun search, which player has the most seasons in a row with at least 10 goals and 10 assists, and there's just so much more you can do. StatHead is stats made simple, and it's perfect if you like stats for fun or if you're a budding scout or analyst trying to deepen your knowledge of the game. The best part is StatHead is currently in beta and their free access period has been extended, so if you sign up today through the link below, you can get all these stats for free. No credit cards or any funny business required. Check it out for free through the link below, and thank you StatHead for sponsoring this video. In both of these seasons, he showed that regardless of his age on paper, he had the maturity to shoulder the responsibility of being in the engine room for a Champions League level side. Such was his importance that in his second season, he played more league minutes than any other Dortmund player. But his manager looked to take advantage of his wide range of skills, as he could anchor deeper in a double pivot alongside Delaney, Witsel or Dahoud. But ignoring the box-to-box promise he showed at Birmingham would be foolhardy. So when Dortmund lined up with a midfield 3, Bellingham was tasked with one of the higher roles on the left-hand side, granting him a lot more freedom. But when he was playing in the more reserved role, we saw Bellingham's biggest evolution: his increased security on the ball. His dynamic box-to-box nature at Birmingham caught the eye, but the risky nature of it meant that his pass completion was in the bottom 20% for central midfielders, as well as being dispossessed more often than 92% of midfielders. As one of the hubs of the side, Bellingham could not solely rely on his off-the-ball ability any longer and had to be the man often receiving off of the centre-backs. And he did just that, making himself more and more available receiving the ball almost twice as often as he did in his Birmingham days. This was complemented by an increased maturity in his possession game, as he often showed more discernment in when to go for the riskier pass and when to just keep the ball ticking over for his side, with his pass completion jumping up as he acted more like a conductor. The one area, however, that still lagged behind the immense progression of the rest of his game was his passing, more specifically his game state changing passes. This is things like progressive passes, which have the ability to pierce through opposition lines, passes into the final third, and into the penalty area, which cause danger. Or, of course, key passes that lead to shots on goal. When looking at all of these stats, Bellingham was not horrific, but compared to the rest of his game, it was the one area that needed improvement, particularly if he was to step in as a metronome in certain matches. But Bellingham's best attribute started to go from very good for a young player to straight up world class. When he was given the more advanced role, whether it was in a 3 or even if alongside a more defensive player like Witsel, he embraced it with both arms. While he couldn't change the game state with his passing, when he received the ball in those central congested zones, he was too big, too quick and too technical for almost every opposing midfielder. Particularly on the transition, it became common occurrence for Bellingham to pick up the ball deep and drift past opposition midfielders like they weren't there, before setting his teammates up to handle the higher attacks. His carries per 90 rose season on season, as he gained more and more confidence in using his abilities to drift past men, and his willingness to try go past men never wavered, as his attempted take-ons and take-ons per 90 were always higher than at least 85% of central midfielders. But compared to his third Dortmund year, seasons 1 and 2 were merely warm-ups. Bellingham began to solidify another one of the traits that would have him head and shoulders above almost every midfielder. Even at just 19 years of age, he began to aggregate the traits he had shown across the seasons into one complete midfielder. This meant continuing to make himself available to his centre-backs in these deeper regions. But now, rather than immediately looking to progress with the ball at his feet, his passing game evolved. He introduced the penetrative passing that his game had been lacking. With more responsibility on his shoulders, it was up to him to penetrate through the pitch. It wasn't just his total volume of passes that went up, his progressive passes for the first time began to stand out, as he was finding his teammates between the lines or even in the final third. Suddenly, he was in the top 10% for Bundesliga midfielders in terms of progressive passes, passes into the final third, and long balls completed. Of course, his ball carrying was still impressive, but it was another element of his game that stood out. As Terzic said, "This season, Jude has had a different role within the team." In the realms of the Bundesliga, Dortmund is generally a ball-dominant side and tend to pin their opposition inside their own box. Before, Bellingham was still heavily involved in this final third play, again using his ability to drift between the lines unnoticed to engage in quick combination play. But now, Bellingham was getting into the box himself, consistently making last-minute runs for Terzic's side to get into excellent goal-scoring and chance-creating regions. Bellingham has always had unusually high involvement in the final third for somebody who operates close to a traditional midfielder, but he took that to the next level as he became a genuine game winner for Dortmund, with his line-breaking runs and his touches in the box in the final third rising, putting him in the top 10% for both metrics. His decision-making was also up immensely, with his shot-creating actions shooting up as well. As Terzic said, he's more attacking, he's entering the opposition box many times. This is the next step that we talked about with him before this season. This culminated in what was to that point his highest league tally, with 8 goals and 5 assists. The trajectory of his evolution was clear, and one Carlo Ancelotti would introduce the most potent version of Bellingham. It was a series of events that led to this evolution, and Ancelotti, being the master of getting the best out of what he has, was the perfect man to aid Bellingham's new form. Benzema had left, leaving a gaping hole in the 9. At the same time, Ancelotti was cursed with having too many high-quality midfielders, and benching too many of them at once could lead to squad disharmony. The midfield diamond was the solution for Ancelotti, but where would Bellingham be used? Kroos and Modric were aging, but both were still far superior orchestrators from deep. Bellingham was a monster when carrying the ball from deep with the ball at his feet, but Valverde had the ability to provide similar athleticism from deep. So instead, Bellingham was to provide the cutting edge to the diamond. Make no mistake about it, when the game called for it, Bellingham could still momentarily drop deeper to be the extra option, and his increased possession and security was still important in these deeper phases. But now with his forwards often both being natural wingers who still like to drift wide, it was vital for Bellingham to provide a strong central presence. Crucially, he didn't play as a centre forward or even a false nine. He was still very much an attacking midfielder, as he would now use perhaps his defining trait, the ability to find space to receive between the lines. With world-class midfielders able to find him, he thrived in this role, being on the receiving end of progressive passes more than ever, and getting roughly 30% more touches in the final third as he honed his attacking instinct. His combination play in tighter regions also improved as he developed a strong relationship with his forwards, and Vinicius Jr. in particular, often finding him in dangerous box positions. Bellingham would still drift wide on occasion, but what caught the eye during his La Liga spell is his presence in the box. Whether the ball is wide or central, Bellingham, despite his stature, always seems to ghost into the box almost unnoticed and find himself in the right place at the right time. And it's not that his shot volume has gone up massively. Bellingham, from the higher position, is now taking shots from much more optimal positions inside the box instead. This has been topped off by a significant overperformance of his XG that I'll be curious to see if he can maintain over the rest of the season. At Madrid, Bellingham has set himself new standards, almost surpassing his career league tally in just half a season. But I'm curious, do you truly think Bellingham is a future Ballon d'Or winner? Drop it down below. Don't forget to check out StatHead through the link down below to get your hands on all these advanced stats for free. And if you like this video, check out this one, looking at the greatest match in Premier League history.